Welcome to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast, where we help you in the LGBTQ plus community find a safe and affordable retirement place. Join Mark Goldstein as he interviews others who live in gay-friendly places around the globe. Learn about the climate, cost of living, healthcare, crime and safety, and more. Now, here's your host, Mark Goldstein.
Today, our journey takes us to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Our guests are Terry Henning and Brian Worley. Brian and Terry have been together for over 26 years. They officially married on their 9th year anniversary in Canada before it was broadly legal in the US. They grew up in the same town in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio. They met at a data technology company where they moved up in the ranks and spent most of their careers. Their shared retirement goal since almost all the beginning of their relationship was to find and move to a place with sunny weather year-round and near the ocean. They never took their eyes off that goal. About 13 years ago, they vacationed in Cabo and fell in love with that place. They also have 2 homes constructed there. In 2018, they moved to Cabo full-time, bringing their dogs and Terry's mom with them. Terry's mom has been living with them for many years, and part of the reason for relocating at that time was to have her advanced age and mobility was becoming very limited, and the longer they waited, the more difficult it was for the move and transition. Upon moving to Cabo, Terry retired and Brian transitioned into a consulting role in the data technology industry, where he is home-based in Cabo. Well, gentlemen, thank you for coming to the podcast and joining us. We welcome you, and tell us why you chose Cabo San Lucas as a city in Mexico.
Well, Mark, thanks for having us. It's nice to be able to share our experiences. I think that Cabo had a number of appeals for us. The weather, being close to water, the landscape, it's kind of the ocean, the mountains and the desert all come together in one place. It's pretty American and English friendly here, a lot of tourists here. So the whole city is really built around tourism. So it's used to handling a lot of expats and foreigners here. And it just really kind of struck a chord with us the first time we visited. And I think that another appeal was that it's still, while it's 1,000 miles from the US, it is still drivable, versus we had visited St. Thomas, Hawaii, different places, thinking about those. And for us, it really made sense to be able to at least have road access so that we have our 2 dogs and to be able to drive them out and not rely on other means of transportation was a big appeal for us also.
Yeah, and so you drove from the U.S. here with your doggies?
Yeah, I actually drove. We spent 4 years in Florida. And when we decided to make the full move here, the dogs and I, along with a couple of friends, packed up and we drove across country. Did it in 6 days because of just the time with the dogs in the car, and had a really good time on the journey. Got to see a lot of Texas, which I'd never seen before. And it was really a beautiful state to see, but the whole drive was nice. So we're now planning on doing the drive a little bit more. We've ended up buying a place back in Ohio, a second place, and we're going to spend a few months there driving the dogs back and forth.
Yeah, that's really an advantage of being able to drive, because we have a lab and another 35 medium-sized dog, 35-pound, and taking them by plane is really not my favorite thing to do. I would much rather drive. So Mexico makes it very enticing in that respect as well.
And another kind of point with living, so we're in the state of Baja California Sur. On the Baja Peninsula, there's 2 states. The northern one is Baja California. And both states are what do you call a free zone. So to be able to drive a U.S. plated vehicle or Canadian plated vehicle into the States is simple enough. No importation is needed or anything. And so we have our vehicles here, and they're plated, of course, from the U.S., and that's made it quite easy. I think that as I understand, other Mexico states on the mainland do not have that same flexibility. So bringing a vehicle in, really, it has to be imported and re-registered and to go through that whole process. So that kind of simplified things for being in this part of Mexico also.
So being in Baja, does that allow you to keep your U.S. driver's license?
It does. The other interesting fact is if you're driving around and you had no idea what was going on, you would assume that there would be a lot of people from South Dakota that live here. And it's because South Dakota allows you to register the vehicle without having a permanent address. So you'll see a lot of South Dakota plates on vehicles.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I have to remember that.
Border cities in Mexico allow for you to bring the car in without importing it. But once you leave their free zones and it's outside of a border city or outside of the Baja, they do require the import of the vehicle, which then requires the driver's license.
Okay. So other parts of...
We did that yesterday. We went and got a driver's license because they do offer local discounts if you can produce a Mexican driver's license. And the discount's pretty large. And we spent 3.5 hours, which was fast for Mexican time, to get our driver's license.
So tell us graphically, where is Cabo located within Mexico and the Baja California or Baja Peninsula?
So we are located at the bottom tip of the Baja Peninsula. There's one road in and out of the Baja. They say that there's actually two. One converges onto the other one. So from a transportation perspective, everyone's taking the same highway in and out. We're at the bottom of the peninsula, so from a safety perspective, there's really no trafficking or anything that comes across our way because it's just hard to get here. Most of it's going through mainland. But we, like Terry said, it's 1,000 miles from the U.S. border.
So if you can kind of visualize the U.S., the North American continent, a map, mainland Mexico sits to the east, and then the Baja Peninsula is it's a long skinny finger on the west. And it actually, one side of the peninsula is entirely on the Pacific Ocean, and then the other side is entirely on, it's either called the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez. I think in high school I always heard it as the Gulf of California, but here it's referred to as the Sea of Cortez.
I think it's your age too, because I wasn't taught that. We were taught it was the Sea of Cortez.
Oh, thanks for that plug.
Yeah, sure.
And so Cabo is at the very, very southern tip of the peninsula. And actually where we sit, the Sea of Cortez and the Pacific Ocean converge. So there's a point, it's at the southernmost tip, and there's a lighthouse here. And it's really the designation of where the two bodies of water meet. And you can at times even see kind of the current that sort of points where the separation is.
So when you cross and you go across the border in the U.S., is it like San Diego area that you cross?
Depends on where you're crossing. Everything seems to come in. You can cross in other locations, but there's the one, Tijuana is one. Even if you're in San Diego, they do recommend you going to Mexico, which is like 2 hours from San Diego. That highway coming down is faster to get down to the area. So most people will come across, unless you're going to spend time in Tijuana, most people will come across the Mexicali one.
Okay.
Which I think on the US side it's called
Calexico.
So tell us the population approximately in Cabo are we talking 200,000-ish?
Yeah,
Do you know?
With the population of individuals that were actually brought or born here, you're looking at about 3,000 or 4,000 individuals. Then you bring in the mix of tourism, you bring in the mix of individuals coming from mainland for work, Mexican mainland, and then you talk about the individuals that either live here full-time expats or have a house here. Depending on the time of year will determine the population, but you're mostly looking about 300,000 people living here full-time at any given time.
Okay. That's a nice amount of people.
And then as far as tourism, I think the statistics are over 1 million tourists are now
Wow.
coming through Cabo every year, either
That
by
many?
travel or I suppose by cruise ship also. On any given day, there's usually a couple of large cruise ships here sitting down by the marina also.
Wow. 1 million people.
Yeah.
So does it get sleepy anytime? Like in the winter time? Does it kind of dry up? Does tourism dry up at all?
We dry up more in the summertime than the wintertime. Summertime, it's usually people think it's too hot to be
Too
here.
hot.
We spent 4 years in South Florida, so the humidity and the heat was really bad there. Here, it's more of the heat than anything, but it's not as bad as it was in South Florida. You still have individuals that will come here to vacation in the summertime, and mostly they're going to be Mexican nationalists that are coming over to vacation during the summertime.
Gotcha.
Probably the quietest month is September. And I mean, that used to be when school was restarting, and then the worst weather, which is more the rainy season, and it is technically hurricane season, although hurricanes are pretty rare here. But September would be the least busy month. And I think since COVID, even that has kind of like scrambled things around a bit, that it's not as kind of quiet as it used to be.
Yeah, one of the things I did when I got here, I was afraid that doing the consulting work wasn't going to keep me busy. I started selling real estate, and it would be that during the summer months it would be dead. COVID actually has changed that. There's really no more in season, out of season. It's now, with everyone being able to work from home, it seems that it's always in season.
Understand. So is there any type of LGBTQ community in Cabo?
There's a small amount. Our goal was not, when we started looking for places to live, that maybe it was Terry's focus, but it was never my focus on finding a place where there was a large community. I was more interested in finding a place that we enjoyed and able to make friends, no matter the orientation of individuals. So what we have found is there's one gay bar here. The gay bar is kind of laughable. We've never been there. One doesn't open until like 11 o'clock at night. We're usually in bed by then. And then
Past my bedtime.
Right. And then two individuals that have gone there, they say it's not the best place to go. We've seen a gay pride parade, and every year it seems to grow. It used to be, when we first saw it, it was like 5 cars and maybe 100 people marching in it. But each year it grows. There is a community of individuals. So if you want to get involved, there are groups that have smaller groups that you can do certain things with. But overall, restaurants, bars, they're very accommodating to most people, because their goal here is to support the tourism or individuals that are living here, and they don't really care about your sexual orientation.
Right. I mean, Cabo's a liberal, open, welcoming town. It's certainly not the LGBTQ equivalent of Puerto Vallarta, for instance. I mean, that would be I suppose, the capital within Mexico. So
Right.
Cabo has not strived to become that by any means, but it's also not by any means an uncomfortable place to be here and be out.
When I think Cabo, I think of honeymoons and tourism that way.
Right.
And
yeah, it is a big like destination wedding place.
yeah.
Like any resort you go to, or there's a restaurant that we go to that's along the beach, and it, like, every time we go there, there's a big wedding going on right on the beach. And any of the resorts at any given time, it seems like they're preparing for some kind of big destination wedding. So it is definitely for that. And there are, so I mentioned like cruise ships coming in here. And I think maybe once or twice a year, you'll see like the Atlantis or some of the gay-oriented
Gay cruises.
Cruises coming in also. So the stop along the way.
So being such a high touristic area, is it harder to make friends?
No, I think we've been able to make a lot of different friends. I was in the Marine Corps many years ago, and we were stationed overseas, and the concept of people bringing you into their home because you're away from your own house was something of that really kind of intrigued me. So we get together with a lot of other individuals that live around our community who are here by themselves. They're together, but their families aren't here. And we tend to spend time with them because we all are lacking some sort of family or friends from the States, and we've created these bonds. So it's very easy to do it. We've made friends with locals as well, and we do things with them. So as Terry mentioned earlier, most of the individuals that are Mexicans that live here speak English because of their clientele. So it makes it much easier to make friends with people.
Do you guys speak Spanish?
No, we took lessons, and then when we go out and tried to practice, they had no clue what I was saying, and then I got frustrated. So I've stuck with English. I've been able to use English. Even selling real estate, the contracts are bilingual. Everything's done with the US dollar. So I've not had a problem with that. Terry, on the other hand.
Yeah, so I took Spanish lessons for, I think, 2 or 3 years. I guess the mistake I made was I learned it from another American. So I have a deep American accent when I speak Spanish. And I know enough to get by. I can hold a conversation. I struggle a little more with understanding than speaking, which usually is the other way around, I think, for most people. But it's helped me a lot to get by when I'm out like in town and have to go to a store or something and request something or whatever, and they only speak Spanish. Then I'm able to make my way through that. And if I'm with Brian, I have to translate sometimes on certain things. But a lot of people live here just fine without having learned the Spanish language, and they do just fine also.
I do a lot of charades or pull my phone out if I have to. And
that's what I would do, sign language or something. Charades is fun.
Right.
Your phone can translate anything. So if it comes to it, I just do that. Sometimes it's better to play stupid, like you have no idea. And depending on the situation, it just goes.
They'll say, yeah.
But back just a little bit more on your question about making friends, like Brian said. So the neighborhood we live in has some people that are here full time, some that are more kind of snowbirds from Canada or from other parts of the U.S. So they're here maybe 6 months out of the year. So sometimes we have more people to hang out with, and then they leave and then they come back, and we've got a lot of new things to catch up on. So it seems that we never have trouble finding anyone to socialize with, hang out with, go out to dinner with.
You don't get bored.
Right. And then Brian also, as he said, has gotten into selling some real estate. And so he's made friends with clients also. So when they stop back into town, they like to get together and go out to dinner or go golf or different things like that. So it's after not really that long here, when we first arrived, it was like we started kind of making friends and being comfortable with being here.
I think we have a busier social schedule here than we've had anywhere.
Right.
That's pretty impressive. You mentioned you can use dual currency, so you can use the peso and you can use US dollars?
Yeah, so most places here in Cabo area will take either US dollars or pesos. I always tell people it's best to always pay in pesos because the places are setting their own exchange rate. And they're not using the bank's exchange rate for the day.
Right.
So that they're making a little bit of money off of that as well. But yeah, Canadians hate that because they have to convert their dollar into either US dollars or Mexican dollars, or Mexican pesos, and that can cause them a heartache. But us from the US, we can use our dollars or we can use our pesos.
Okay, and that's not anywhere else in Mexico, though, right?
I don't think so. Even like if you go further, there's a fairly big town called La Paz, which is maybe 90 minutes north of here, and I think that's maybe even less common there. But just because it's such a hot tourist spot, that it's easier. They make it easier on the clientele just to use dollars. But like Brian said, they make up their own exchange rate, and it's probably 10% less favorable than if you would have exchanged dollars for pesos yourself. Or even we always just we have a credit card that doesn't charge foreign transaction fees, and I think
Right.
they give the best rate of all. But it's
And they
also
exchange it automatically.
right, yeah. And the other thing that kind of took some getting used to is so much like just day-to-day transaction here with hiring somebody to clean your house or to do maintenance projects on the house, things like that are typically done in cash transactions. And so I've handled a whole lot more in pesos than what I got used to. So as we said, we came here 5 years ago, and for the last several years in the US, it's become so like non-cash. Everything is just either online transfer, credit card. And that's not the case here, that I always have like the equivalent of a couple $1,000 US in
In
pesos
pesos.
on hand, just because of needing to make those transactions in cash.
Yeah, but you also you're leaving out. You can be at a restaurant or a gas station, and their credit card machine all of a sudden just doesn't work, not getting reception. So
Right.
now you have to pull out cash because they don't have
Right.
any other way of doing it. So each car has money stashed in it just in case we have to pay pesos for the gas. And there's been times at restaurants where we've gotten friends with restaurant owners, and they just can't take the credit card. We have no cash. So we just leave and come back. I mean, we leave and come back maybe a day or two later and pay them for their bill. So it's a very honest society that they know it doesn't work sometimes, and you leave and come back later on and pay them for it.
I guess you get used to it, but I would have to use like a calculator to convert every time I spent money.
Yeah, it can cause a problem. Our friends are here for 3 months. They rented a place, and I think what gets them whacked out is the tipping. And 20% of a number is 20%, no matter if it's pesos or dollars, right? I mean, you can calculate it, but they seem to have trouble calculating it as it relates to in pesos, but it's still
Pesos?
20%.
Yeah.
20% of whatever it is.
Yeah. The exchange rate is held sort of steady around 20 pesos to the dollar. It's getting a little bit weaker the last couple of months, but 20 to 1 is fairly easy to calculate in your head.
Yeah.
At least I'm kind of number oriented. So for me, it's not too big of a deal to get used to kind of like making that quick calculation.
Yeah, I like things done for me. So I found actually a website that issues debit cards. It's called Wise,
Mm-hmm.
and it converts every exchange, every currency into your currency. So in other words, you could pull money out of your US bank account in US dollars and tell it to convert to pesos.
Right.
And it could hold your pesos in the account. You can actually use your debit card anywhere to use those pesos and have a better exchange rate
Right.
as well.
We actually did open a local bank account here. It's better to have money here, I think, than like trying to use an ATM card from a US account, because then you're going to get hit with a lot of fees to be able to do that, and needing to have the cash on hand. You mentioned Wise, and so that's one of the means of like transferring money. It's more economical than just trying to do a wire transfer to get money into our account here. But the whole like local bank process is a lot less like streamlined, I guess I would say, than what I was used to in the US.
US.
Just to open an account may take 3 or 4 visits to the bank, and it's the efficiency.
Bureaucracy.
One of my early experiences was there was a process where I could use, I think, Zoom, XOOM, which is a PayPal affiliate, and transfer money to like a bank branch here. And so I made the transfer, and this was maybe for $1,000. And I sat and waited for about a half hour. And then I was told when I got up to the teller, I needed to wait over to the side. And then 10 minutes later, they said, have a seat. And then as I was sitting there, and I knew enough Spanish to know, they taped up a sign and said, there's no more money today. And so I spent 2 hours to find out they just ran out of money. And that's not like on a Friday. I've learned that there's time when to go to the bank, because they may not have received the money for that day on a Monday, or they may have run out on a Friday. So Friday afternoons are not a good idea to go. So it's a little bit crazy sometimes.
Something to get used to.
You wouldn't think a bank would run out of cash, but
No.
it happens.
Wow. Okay. Well, those are the differences. It's good to point that out,
Right.
because
it's just things to get used to here. It's like,
okay. Tell us what the economy is like. Examples of housing costs, renting versus buying, bills, water bills, gas bills, taxes, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Your day to day.
we're considered an island per se for Mexico, because to transport things from mainland Mexico down to the Baja, you either do it two ways. You drive up and back down the 1,000 miles to get to the tip, or you ship it across on containers. So it's a little bit expensive to be here from that perspective. Then you have a lot of U.S. citizens from the West Coast and Canadians from the West Coast that came down and started buying property, and the prices of properties that had ocean views for them compared to what they were getting on the West Coast was a lot cheaper. So they drove the prices up from a land perspective, real estate perspective. And then all your working just to get things done, it's expensive to live in the city, especially for non-US or Canadian citizens. So they charge a lot of money to have the work done as well. So it's not the cheapest place in Mexico. I've heard it's the most expensive city in Mexico to live in. I don't know if that's true or not, but you still can get into real estate. You still can get into a nice 2-bedroom condo for in the 200,000s that would give you a view of the water. So you still have some good values here from that perspective. Rentals, depending on where you're at, what you're looking for. A friend of ours just rented a nice little 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo for $1,000 a month. There's no thrills to it, no view or anything. It's downtown Cabo. He can walk to any place he wants to, and you can go up to thousands of dollars per month if you want better amenities. We have over 1,000 restaurants here, and they consider a restaurant being somebody's front yard, and sometimes those are the best restaurants around. I mean, we've eaten at a few restaurants in people's front yards and had great meals. Our favorite hamburger place sits in front of, it's kind of in a warehouse, and you sit in the parking lot and eat, but the hamburgers and the french fries are probably the best I've ever had, and the french fries kind of remind me of McDonald's fries.
And there is a McDonald's here too.
There is.
I'm sure. Americanized a little bit as well with fast food.
Yep. And I think, I mean, you could own a property for as little as what, 100,000 or less, all the way up to like tens or $30 million. I mean, it's just any price range is here.
It's all over the place.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the prices that you mentioned is still pretty attractive,
right,
as compared to the U.S.
Right.
And you can actually, so you're probably better at explaining like the ownership process and the trust and all that.
Yeah, I mean, to buy property in Mexico, they call it the canon law, that depending on how close you are to a land border or a water border, you can't own the land per se. It goes into a trust. So I think it's 50 miles from a water border and 100 miles from a land border. The property goes into a trust, and the bank owns the trust or holds the trust for you. You pay a fee each year for that bank to hold the trust. And it's a 50-year trust, and then at the end of the 50 years, you renew the trust. So that's not bad, because as the owner of the property, you have still rights to do with it you want. You can burn the property down if you choose so, sell the property, rent the property out. It's just that it's being held by the bank in a trust.
So what happens if you're old, like me?
Wow, we're old too. What do you mean, what happens if you're old? Like,
so 65 years old, it's owned by a trust. It could be renewed after what, how many years?
50 years.
50 years. So I guess
you would leave your property to someone.
And it would be in a trust?
It would be in the deed. It gets marked in the deed how the property is transferred to an individual. And then at the death of those individuals, it moves over to those individuals within the deed, and they would have the rights to continue under that trust and expand the trust after 50 years or sell the property.
Okay. All right. Going back to electric bills and utilities. What's the average on air conditioning, heating? Do you have heating at all?
We don't have, I mean, there's some houses that have heating. We don't have heating in ours. Most houses don't, which is the electric company. They have different programs based on where you are, where you live within the Cabo area. So those that are considered local communities where kind of the Mexicans would be living that support Cabo and keep it running, they have an area that they live in, and their prices are much cheaper for electricity than, let's say, where expats would be living. So they do base your pricing on where you live in the city. And then with that, they have 3 different tiers that you pay based on your usage. So the more you use, the more they're going to start charging you per kilowatt hour. So you would go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. And if you hit tier 3, it's the most expensive price point.
Give us an example.
Yeah, so
how much do you pay for a month? Like
we have
in the summer?
We had, before we put solar panels in, we expected to pay on average $500 a month to keep the house with the electricity, and that's running the air conditioning. We have anything that's electricity outside of your stove, your water heater, and your dryer, because those all run on propane gas. The rest would run on electricity. We accounted for $500 a month on average. And then after we got the solar panels put in, we are now running about $200 a month on average. And we don't run the air conditioner through the winter like we do the summer. So that's on average.
Do you have a pool?
Yeah, we have a pool. So we have a pool pump that runs maybe 10 hours a day. It's a pretty small pool, but that's circulating maybe 25 gallons an hour or minute, something like that. We're probably fairly high consumers, though. We usually have the house closed up so that we can have the air conditioners running and keeping it comfortable. But the climate, unless it's in the really hot months, a lot of people like to just leave the windows open and have the breeze coming through all the time. It's more of a dusty climate being in the desert, so we just prefer to not deal with the dust. So we keep it closed up. But I think we're probably, those numbers that Brian was stating is probably higher than maybe what a lot of people would have here also.
Yeah, you hear a lot of people talk that they're spending $100 a month. I've heard some people $50 a month, but they don't run their
with solar or without?
Without. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you hit that third tier, and it almost, I think, doubles the cost of kilowatt hours from tier 1 to tier 3.
Yeah. And then, like Brian mentioned, so our stove, our dryer, and our water heater are all gas. And so usually an individual house has its own propane tank. I think we have 3 tanks. 2 are 250 liters and one's 500 liters. And that the 500 liter also heats our pool. And the price of gas has been going up. I think we probably spend on average a couple of $100 a month on gas also. And that's, like I said, for cooking and running the dryer as well. So that's the other piece. And then water. So we live in a resort community, and they have their own desalination plant. So we get water directly fed from that. And I think we spend just showers, the regular kind of thing. And then we have a little irrigation system for our yard. So we probably spend between $25 and $40 a month on water also.
Can you drink? So you can drink tap water? It comes in filtered or desalinized, or?
It's desalinized, and then we prefer, so we have a cistern on our house. So the feed goes into a cistern. So we have what is it? I'm trying to calculate. It's 2,500 liter cistern that the water sits in. And then we have a whole house filter. It's like a 4-stage filter plus a UV sterilizer that sterilizes it right before it comes in. So we do drink out of the tap.
The water in Mexico, It's not that it's bad. It's how long it sits in the cistern, because every house has a cistern that it would sit in. The government will, if you're not inside of a development that has their own desal plant, the government then sends water your way. And if they decide to send it that day, then you get it. If not, well, hopefully you have enough to continue on. Or you order a water truck and they'll come and fill your cistern. It's how long the water sits in your cistern that's the problem. If it sits in there long enough and you're not really doing anything about it, that's where the bacteria will start to grow. And that's when people start to get sick. But it's not the water itself, it's just how long it sits in the cistern. So there's a lot of people in our community that they do not have a water filter. We have condos that share a cistern, and because of that, it quickly runs through it, and they have no filtration system at all, and they drink right out of the tap water,
Wow.
And they have no problems.
That's pretty amazing, because most of Mexico is not that way.
Right. And the restaurants also, I think that they don't want the reputation of anyone getting sick. So we've been perfectly comfortable drinking just house water from the restaurants for years.
Wow, there's a trick to that. As you mentioned, they don't want you to get sick, but when they serve you house water, it's actually bottled water that they're not charging you for.
No, that's true.
And so you'll get a lot of people that come to visit, and you're like, no, house water is fine. And they'll look at you like you're crazy. You're going to drink house water. And it's like, well, it's free bottled water, but you choose to pay for the bottle if you'd like to.
I hope they don't get regular tap water.
Right. I mean, that's always a fear about Mexico. Don't drink the water, but
yeah. And I always worried about the ice cubes too.
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah,
they're usually bought as well. Most of them will buy the bags of ice and bring them in.
Makes sense to have those cocktails.
Yep, that's right.
How about taxes? Do you pay? What are the taxes like?
So property taxes are very inexpensive. The Mexican government gets you all the way around. Taxes, our house would be valued at close to, well, we bought it $600,000, so we pay about $600 or $700 a year.
I think less than that. I just paid it, and it was, I think, under $500.
You got a discount too because you paid it early. They'll give you discounts as well.
Plus, we have a residency, so that also reduced it. I think it would be double that if we didn't have the early pay and the residency discount, something like that.
So is that per year?
Per year.
Yes.
And then you have your trust fee, which is about the same cost as your property tax. So you're looking at, most people can, on the average, can get by with about $1,200 a year for property taxes and the trust payment that you have to make. And then if you buy a property, when you go to buy the property, there's a 2% sales tax that the Mexican government charges you. So right away, depending on the value of what you're buying it for, you're going to pay the Mexican government 2% of that. And then when you go to sell the property, there's capital gains that you immediately pay to the Mexican government. They don't let you reinvest it. You immediately have to pay it. It's set at 35% for individuals, but there are some ways around it to reduce it to usually down to about 20%.
So they get you coming and going.
That's right.
And then while you're here, the sales tax is kind of high too. It's at 16%. So anything you buy, 16% of that is sales tax. The nice thing, though, is any price tags, like in any store, Walmart or anything, already has the sales tax on it. So you don't have to do a little mental calculation of this is plus X percent like you usually see back in the States, at least. But that's 16% is a little bit steep.
Still lower than Europe.
True.
But yeah, it's still lower than Europe.
But
with those taxes...
Sorry?
I'm sorry. I was going to say, with those taxes, does that equate into free health care?
There's other taxes that equate to healthcare. If you pay income tax, there's a portion of your income tax that you would pay that would go towards socialized healthcare if you wanted to do that. Part of my real estate fees, I have to pay those taxes, and then I could use the socialized healthcare system. I don't, but I could choose to. I think after retirement age, there's like a $200, like a Social Security payment that you would get from the government to live off of. as well that people get. But for our taxes, we really don't get any benefit from it. And some of the roads, you kind of wonder what they're doing with the sales tax and the property taxes and the other taxes that they're collecting, because there are times where you're going down a major road and it will just turn into a dirt road for no apparent reason.
So but all the dirt roads are still on like Google Maps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. You see this like little dirt road going off somewhere, and Google Maps will say, take this road, and it gets you wherever you're wanting to go.
So does it work? You pay U.S. taxes first, income taxes, and then let's say Mexico's taxes at a higher level. Do you pay the difference of income tax between the U.S. and Mexico?
Well,
at the end of the year?
Yeah, right now, any income I make in Mexico immediately just gets Mexican taxes, and that's it. Any money we make in the U.S., I do not have to report to the Mexican government. So we still pay any income that we have in the U.S. All our money still sits in the U.S., and we just pay the U.S. taxes.
Wow. So they don't ask for, and is that all over Mexico, I would imagine?
Yes.
So
they just don't.
So you don't have to report what you're paid in U.S. taxes to Mexico?
No.
That's kind of nice.
Kind of nice,
because
right?
other countries are not like that.
Yeah.
Other countries want to know what your worldwide income taxes are, and then you pay the difference between your tax rate in the U.S. versus their tax rate in the country every year.
We had never come to Mexico until our friends came and bought a timeshare and then said that they'd give us a week. And we were kind of afraid of what this was going to be like. And when we got here, we realized, I think the U.S. government does a very good job of scaring people into coming to Mexico, because if you come, you'll realize that it's not as bad as everyone says it is. It's safer than most places in the U.S. We've spent time in Tijuana, and I mean, I'm kind of in love with Tijuana. Just some of the areas there are really neat. We've flown in there a few times to go to wine country in the Baja, which has been a very fun experience as well. So we spent a lot of time going around Mexico, just seeing different things, living here.
Probably if the word got around, everyone would be moving.
It seems like the word is getting around, because in the 5 years we've been here, you can definitely tell just through traffic, through like the lines when you go to Costco to check out, or the crowds here. It's like continually increasing. The word has definitely gotten out, and there's lots and lots of new construction, new resorts going in, new condo buildings, new housing developments. It's crazy how much it's growing around here. And there's actually kind of a labor shortage. To hire people to work at the resorts, the restaurants, so forth. It's like those businesses are having a hard time getting people, because there's just so much going on here, and not enough people to fill all the jobs.
I definitely want to visit. I mean, I'm going to Europe, and we kind of have our mind set on Europe, but I want to visit Mexico and see what that's all about, and see a lot of people I know have moved to Mexico.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really, I mean, it's a wonderful place, and I think it's easy enough to kind of settle into and have it feel like home.
I do want to point out, because this scares people, and it's an interesting story, that when you drive down the Baja, you will go through at least 5 Army checkpoints that you drive through, and they'll stop your car and possibly inspect it if they feel like inspecting it. But there are at least 5 checkpoints that you go through as you come down the Baja, military checkpoints.
That's interesting.
Going up and back down, so you kind of feel a little safer, because they're just watching to see what's happening. Like I said, there's only one road in and out of there.
I mean, I assume it's to control, like, make sure there's
drugs.
No illegal trafficking of humans, drugs, weapons, anything like that. So, and the other question, I mean, one is, can you drink the water? And 2 is, do you feel safe there? And we point out, well, there haven't been any school shootings here or concert shootings or movie theater shootings or you name it, type of shootings that we're hearing about every day in the
Yeah.
States anymore. I mean, of course, Mexico has its share of crime and violent crimes, but really the bottom line is don't mess with like the cartels and
Right.
you'll be
If you
fine.
don't do drugs or
Right.
trade drugs, then you probably don't have anything to worry about.
Right.
We had a client a couple months ago decide that they weren't going to buy here because of what happened to the one lady who was killed by her friends. But when it first happened, no one understood how she died, other than she was killed in Mexico in the Cabo area. Ended up being her friends, which really weren't her friends. And it's sad to try to blame a society or a group of people when it's not really them that caused the problem. It was Americans.
But Mexico doesn't allow guns, correct?
That's right.
To the average person.
That's right.
That makes a huge difference. And you know what's going on. You hear the news, I'm sure.
Yeah. And if people, I think they think, well, I'll just bring my gun in anyhow. And if they get caught, they're facing serious time in a Mexican prison, which would not be fun.
No. Being in any prison is not fun, especially a foreign one.
Right.
So
back to cost, the one thing I wanted to kind of throw out there is, as we learned more, when we first bought our place down here, we didn't understand kind of the processes or what you could do or couldn't do. So everything we bought from a store here in the Cabo area, which can add up because they're importing it and charging all these different fees. But there are companies that will import from the United States into Mexico and bring it down. And it's usually still cheaper to do it that way than it is to buy stuff here in the Cabo area. So you can furnish a whole house from the United States and have it imported into Mexico and brought down and still save a lot of money.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just going to say, and if you import used furniture, there's no import fee. So you're really just being charged
by weight,
the carrier, whatever the carrier costs to bring it down. So when we moved from Florida, we shipped our furniture from Florida to San Diego, and the importer then shipped it down. It was like $15,000 to have somebody pack it in Florida and ship it to San Diego. And then the importer charged $3,000 to bring it from San Diego down to Cabo and unpack it and put it into the house. So his cost was very inexpensive compared to what it cost to get it there.
Right.
But it was still cheaper to do it that way than it was to buy all new stuff here.
Right. There's an Amazon Mexico, and what I've found is if I'm shopping for something and I look on Amazon Mexico, just say like a bottle of vitamins, and then I look on Amazon US, I can order from Amazon US, and then there's a freight forwarding process where I have it shipped to an address in San Diego, and then it forwards down here to a place in Cabo that I can go and pick it up. I have to pay a 28% fee on top of the invoice price to get it here, which includes like the 16% tax plus just getting it through customs and transportation and so forth. So the 28% sounds high, but if I compare to Amazon Mexico for that same product, it's still oftentimes maybe 8 out of 10 cheaper if I do it myself that way versus buy it directly through Amazon Mexico.
That's amazing.
They're still doing the importation, and then they're raising their prices too. So in, like I said, a lot of cases I'm finding just going through that process and still paying that 28% is the most economical way of getting some things like that I need to order online.
That's I didn't expect that importing something from the U.S. being less than just buying it directly at in Cabo.
We didn't either until we figured it out. And it was like, well, I guess that's the best way to do it.
Because most things are imported anyhow. So that's what it ends up, how it works.
Tell us about arts and culture. Do you have any in Cabo?
Maybe. You have to remember it's all going to be in Spanish if there's any arts and culture. San Jose, which is about a 40-minute drive north of where we're at, where the airport where you fly into, They have a great downtown area. They've actually kind of created this. It's a lot cleaner and cuter. It's more artsy. They do an arts walk on Thursday night in their big town center, and a lot of people will go down to that on Thursdays. We just started one in Cabo, or Cabo just started one within the last year in their little town square, and it seems to draw a small amount of individuals to it to see. We did have every year the movie festival will come here, and we went to see that. So they have once a year they'll do an arts festival. They have fishing contests. So the Bisbee is in October. It's one of the largest fishing contests in the world. Depending on the number of entries will determine the prize, but I thought it was like millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's a fishing for marlin, and the largest catch, the prize is like over $1 million.
And then who's the guy that owns the?
Oh, Sammy Hagar owns the Cabo Wabo. So I guess he does a lot of music. He comes into town for his birthday. It's a big ordeal. So Sammy Hagar fans are all about that. I don't think there's really any kind of live theater here per se. There's like a big civic center that hosts some things. We went there once for something and weren't really all that impressed with it. We are tonight going to a comedy show, so they're local.
In English?
We'll have local things, like you can get a lot of live music at different places. This comedy show's in English tonight. We've been to this place. It's one of our favorite restaurants just to go to for breakfast or what have you. But then he's bringing in these different shows about once every month or two. And
it was every quarter. I think it's every quarter, and he started it maybe a year and a half ago. And he's drawing in crowds. They bring 2 to 3 comedians from LA area, and they come down and do a show for one night.
Oh wow! At least you have something.
And then there's a Hard Rock resort here, which I think brings in some live concerts, things like that also. So the different resorts, different things, and so it's possible to get into them to kind of see what's going on. One thing I wanted to so we'll go back to my Fun with Flags lecture. When we talk about Cabo, there's really a large area called Los Cabos. And then Brian mentioned the town San Jose del Cabo, which is at the northern end. And that's more of kind of the artsy town. It's a little bit quieter. And then we're at the other end. So it's about a 20-mile, 30-minute drive just to go from San Jose del Cabo on the north down to Cabo San Lucas, where we are. And it's more of kind of the party town is what it's known for. So the downtown has more nightclubs, more nightlife, things like that going on. Now we live in a neighborhood that's about 15 minutes outside of downtown, so it's pretty quiet where we are. Quiet. But just kind of if you have to give sort of a personality to the two towns within Cabo, that Cabo San Lucas is more the party part, and then San Jose del Cabo is more kind of the arts part of town.
Look at you, party boys.
Yeah. We're here partying all the time.
And bed by 10 o'clock.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's probably later than me.
Right.
So I'm trying to picture what Cabo San Lucas equates to, like looking at a city in the U.S. I'm thinking, does it compare to like Fort Lauderdale? Does it compare to Beverly Hills? Can you compare it to anything?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, downtown Cabo San Lucas, both downtowns are not like sprawling metropolitan areas. I mean, if you drive through downtown, it's 5 minutes from one end to the other. It's a couple of miles.
If I had to say what it was like, I would say New Orleans. Downtown. What is it? Where all their bars and that are, where it's kind of like
the French Quarter.
Yeah, kind of nasty and smelly. Lots of bars and drinking, restaurants, good restaurants. I would have to equate it to that. A lot of live music. So you can go, like Terry mentioned, most of the restaurants at night will have live music. that you can go and listen to. Some is slow, some is hard rock. It's all over the board depending on what you want. So that's what I would equate that one to. San Jose, I would equate that one to, where'd we go the other in November that we were shocked?
Oh, Santa Fe.
Santa Fe. We had never been to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
New Mexico.
So we decided to go. Well, I had to go for something that I was doing for the company I do consulting work for. And we thought, oh, it might be a place that we'd like to visit. And just shocked at, like, it closes up early in the evening.
It does.
That's how San Jose is. That's north of us.
But more
very artsy.
Yeah, the artsy vibe of Santa Fe is what I would agree.
Yeah.
San Jose kind of.
But San Jose closes up early too.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, we've left restaurants there on a Friday night at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and there's no one on the streets anymore. I mean, It's dead.
So as far as restaurants are concerned, can you get any type of international cuisine, or are you more limited to Mexican?
Kind of what we joke about is, well, the short answer is yes. And our running joke is it's hard to find good Mexican food here. That there's places seriously, there's wonderful Italian places, there's wonderful Asian places, sushi, I mean, Indian, kind of lots of different things. But then the Mexican places, there's a few, but one of the biggest ones that like all the tourists will recommend, we went to when we first moved here, and it was like, you ordered and 5 minutes later the food was there. So it was all just obviously prepared in the kitchen. And it was this very kind of it was almost like a stereotypical like Mexican experience. And the food was like not good, nothing wonderful at all. I think venturing more into the local neighborhoods and finding like Mexican food there,
authentic or local.
Thing, like we really avoid kind of the downtown touristy areas because we find better quality and cheaper menus as you kind of get more out into the local neighborhood areas.
I think one of the things people, especially coming from the U.S., once you sit at a restaurant, it's your table for the rest of the night. They're not going to rush you out of there, but they're also not in a rush to serve you either. So you're kind of there, and they consider you're at your house now, and they will come and they'll serve you. You have to ask for the check when you're ready to go. You've got to ask for the check because they're not going to present it until you're ready for it. We're in the U.S. halfway done the meal, and they've served the check and everything, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm not in a rush.
I still have the fork in my mouth, and they come along and they're like taking my plate away, and I'm like, where are you going?
We were
take your time.
We were at one of our favorite restaurants the other week, and I asked to get another bottle of wine, and they didn't have it. But they didn't tell me they didn't have it. Instead, they went and bought it from somewhere else, which took them 20 minutes to do. And when I finally realized what they were doing, it was too late to say, oh, no, I'll take something else, which then held up our dinner. But for them, it was they wanted to ensure I got what I wanted. And waiting is nothing for them. So they think we're okay waiting too.
How have you gotten accustomed to that? Is that a challenge?
At first, it was a challenge until we started going back to the States. And then it became like, no, I enjoy just sitting at a restaurant. I'm not being forced to leave. It's my table for the rest of the night. And they'll serve me when I get served. And at least I know my food's going to be fresh because they make it fresh. It's not pre-made because they have no idea when you're going to order or what you're going to order. The one restaurant, sometimes we go in and don't even look at a menu. We just ask him to make us whatever he wants because we're not sure what to get that night.
And it's always something wonderful and a new surprise.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Definitely good to know. Good restaurants are very important to me, at least.
I never ate seafood. I grew up Catholic, and my mom would serve cream tuna or fish sticks on Lent, and never smelled good, looked good, so I wouldn't eat it. But I started eating fish a few years. Well, once we moved here full time, I started eating fish because it was fresh. So
it's healthy.
I trust it.
So as we said, we used to live in Southeast Florida for 4 years before here, which was over in Palm Beach County. And Brian always hated the restaurants there. We felt like the service wasn't that great, and we really couldn't find many restaurants that just had like wonderful food. And that's one of the things I say that Brian's like a cat. If you feed him and make him happy, then he's never going to leave. And that's kind of the case here in Cabo, that we found so many wonderful restaurants. And what's kind of like funny about that is when we first started coming, we found restaurants that we really loved. And then as we found more, it's like those restaurants started falling further down on the list, that it was like we kept finding better and better
ones.
So some of those that we loved way back, it's like we haven't been to in years now.
Mm-hmm. There.
We had one in Florida. The manager was our owner, good looking guy. The food was great. The service was great. We would go there every Friday night to eat. Just enjoy talking to the owner and trying different things. And then when he sold the business, the restaurant went downhill and we never went back. But I like those types of places where you go and
a little individual,
right,
or whatever.
And mom and pop place
here is the owners in the kitchen, or the owner, and it's like very, very few chains here. I think there's an Applebee's like up in San Jose, and it's like, why would anyone even want to eat at an Applebee's when you've got all these other great places?
Really good restaurants, yeah.
It's like the 1950s here. Kids aren't on seatbelts. They're still riding shotgun on cars, but doctors will still come to your house and make house calls. So
really?
Oh yeah, that's like one of the most amazing things is like any physician that I've seen, or general practitioner, or any other specialists, it's like you have their number on WhatsApp, and anytime, day or night, it's like you've got a question, you send them a text and they'll respond, and like you don't get billed for that. Like,
just like here.
Yeah, right, exactly. They, like Brian said, they'll make house calls. Or we have some friends that rented a condo here. They drove from Ohio and they want to spend the winter here. And one had a fall after she was here, like the second day. And so they wanted to be seen by a doctor. So I sent a text to our doctor and said, can somebody check our friend? And I think within 2 hours that day, a house call was made to see her. And I think it cost her $50 or $100 for that house call and to be examined. And they referred her to get some other x-rays or CAT scans or something. So she went to the hospital and was able to do that. But it's just like unheard of kind of bedside manner and like direct communication and responsiveness and no red tape and no waiting. Like,
that's unbelievable.
See somebody. So
you schedule your appointment directly with the doctor through WhatsApp.
Right.
Sounds like Brian hit it on the head stuck in the 50s. I remember house calls in the U.S. I think that stopped either in the 50s or the 60s.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have great technology. I mean, you go even to restaurants, and they're taking the order on an iPad that's getting shipped back to the kitchen. So right. It's not like they're writing things down or that. It's still
And do you pay? Do they bring the device to the table to pay?
Yeah. They bring the device to the table to ensure that you see what they're doing and everything's done with that device. But again, that then causes, if the internet's down and the device can't work, if you know the owner of the restaurant, you then leave and come back a day or two later and pay him again.
If not, you sleep there.
Right. Right.
So that's pretty funny.
Maybe one other thing I can talk about on the medical part, since this is a podcast for retirees, if I could share the experience with having my mother here. When we moved here, she was 91, and she was mentally, she was fine. Physically, she was kind of going downhill. So she was becoming more just kind of weak and debilitated. After we'd been here for a year, she had a fall and broke her hip. And so we had surgery done to repair her hip, put a plate in here locally in Cabo. And she became kind of more debilitated as time went on, that she needed assistance. She was a fall risk. She needed assistance going to the bathroom or bathing and just kind of getting around the house, things like that. So being here in Cabo, had we been in the U.S., it would have most certainly been kind of a nursing home scenario that we couldn't really afford to have in-home care for her. And I was not able to dedicate the time myself to be able to do that for her. So we were able to hire a local person to be her kind of assistant to help her get to the bathroom, do all those things I was just saying. And it costs about $200 a week to do that, which is way cheaper than any sort of nursing home.
Yeah.
And there was the language issue. So my mom only spoke English and the caretaker only spoke Spanish, but being together every day, they kind of worked it out. It's like her caretaker learned what my mom wanted. My mom would just speak in English and she was figuring it out. She gave her a very good diet, made sure she was always tended to. And she was also kind of taking care of our dogs throughout the day too, just feeding them if we weren't home, things like that. When my mom became ill, it was really, we managed to keep COVID out of our house altogether, but then she caught bronchitis, and that was ultimately what kind of did her in. It was over a couple of weeks. And so we were able to have a doctor come into the house to make a house call like we were talking about. And it came to, he checked her vitals one day and he said, we need to talk. And she was really on that descent down. And so they have a kind of a hospice-like doctor that came in and helped her to be comfortable. And so she was able to spend her final days here in her own bed, here at home with us. And it was just not what you would expect in the US. It was just like, you couldn't have imagined it for a time like that to have been any better.
Oh yeah, you'd go bankrupt.
Right. And just the comfort of being here. So it just was being in a foreign country. And when that happened, it was as easy of a process as you could imagine. And the cost was like next to nothing for the cremation, for the death certificates, for everything.
Gotcha. That's important. And again, comes down to that price. It's something that won't bankrupt you.
Right.
So is there public transportation at all? I don't think there is in Mexico at all, except for buses.
Yeah, they have buses, Ubers. They have taxis, buses, and Uber. Though there's a big ordeal with Ubers in our area. Mexico as a country has said Ubers are accepted. Each state or city has had its own problems with Uber. I think Mexico City finally got over it. But here in Cabo, they're still fighting it because the taxi drivers make a lot of money. They charge a lot of money to take you around. And Ubers have come in and are eating that up, right? So some resorts won't let Ubers in. There have been demonstrations around Ubers. There have been blockages where if a police officer thinks you're an Uber driver, they will stop you. And that was at the beginning, so maybe a couple of years ago. It's gotten a lot better. So Ubers are very easy to get here nowadays, and there's still some weirdnesses about it, like they can't take you to the airport, and some resorts won't let them in by themselves. They must be with the person staying at that resort. So you can't have the Uber pick you up at the resort, but they can take you back to the resort and they'll let you in.
So do you need a car?
You don't need a car. No, unless you want a car, you don't need a car.
So within, like, from your home, can you walk to the bank? Can you walk to the fruit and vegetable store? Can you walk to a doctor?
Yeah, where we chose to live, no, we have to have a car. But if we wanted to live in Cabo without a car, we would just move to a different area.
Okay. So it is possible to live there without a car. Okay. And we talked about crime or lack of crime. So if I walked my dog at night, would I feel safe in your area?
You'd feel safe anywhere that you should be in, right? And part of the reason that is the economy runs on tourism. And so if tourists are afraid to come, their economy is going to crash. So they do everything possible to ensure that people feel safe being here.
Like that. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you wish that was in Cabo that you don't have that you might have had in the elsewhere in the U.S.?
I have one.
I mean, I do miss, not that we were like regular theater goers, but I kind of miss that there's not a performing arts option here, would be one thing I would say. I mean, we do have nice movie theaters here, and you can, like Brian was mentioning, the film festival. So movies are played in English. They'll have the Spanish subtitles on them, but they're very nice theaters, the stadium seating and the things that have come into the U.S. cinemas also.
Yeah, I don't know if the arts thing doesn't bother me, because if I really want artsy, we can go somewhere and do that. But mine is Chipotle.
Is what?
Chipotle.
Chipotle?
He's weird.
Yeah. Again,
What is that?
it's the restaurant, the Mexican restaurant, fast food restaurant. Chipotle.
Oh, Chipotle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, to each his own.
Right?
I like it good. I like their wrap.
He doesn't like the Mexican food in Mexico, but he wants Chipotle.
No, it's hard to find good Mexican food here. If you found it, it's good.
That's so funny.
Yeah, but I have a friend that has a Mexican restaurant that his food is good, but again, it's hard to find one.
To me, it's hysterical. You're in Mexico and you can't find a good Mexican restaurant.
But we hear that a lot from people we'll meet that they live in Mexico City, and they'll come into Cabo and they'll tell you that it's the worst food around here. Partly because they go back to Mexico City, and we've spent time a weekend in Mexico City, and their food is good. I mean, it was a fun place to be.
Sure. How about obtaining a visa? What did you have to go through? Did you have to go through the consulate in the U.S. to get a visa? And I'm assuming there's a temporal and a permanente visa.
Yeah. So Mexico did require visitors to have a visa from the U.S. and Canada. Other countries have different regulations, but flying in from the U.S. or Canada, you used to have to fill out a form, and the form allowed you to stay in country for 180 days. Within the last 6 months or so, the visa requirement is no longer required. So when you fly in as a U.S. or Canadian citizen, you're no longer required to fill the form out. That form also gave you a little piece of paper that when you left the country, you were supposed to give them that form back. And if you didn't have it, they charged you money to get one. So that a visa requirement is no longer needed. And you'll see that if you drive across the border, they don't even stop you any longer. It's just waving you through. As a resident, so that visa allowed you to stay for 180 days, and then you'd have to leave the country. You could ask for a residency card, and that allows you to stay for as long as you want. With a residency card, the rules continue to change. So as we talk about it, they could change again when someone hears this podcast. But it does require you to go to the consulate in your state to start the process to get it approved. And then from there, if it's approved, you have 30 days to come into Mexico and finalize the process within their government processes. It's all over the board on who you are and what you're asking for. Sometimes if you own property, that's all you need to get permanent residency. They don't expect anything else. They may require you to show assets if you don't own a property. And it's more around how much money you have in the bank. Some people say that you have to show it's a couple $1,000s. Others will tell you, no, it's 100,000. Some people said that they've had to show it in one account. Others said, no, it's okay to show it in multiple accounts. Others have said, no, I had to show where my income was coming in from. So it really will.
All over.
Yeah, it's all over the board, and it will depend on what they ask for during your first meeting. So just be prepared to show certain things. If you don't own property, they may give you a temporary residency card, which I think lasts for 3 or 5 years, and then you can renew it and potentially ask for permanent. I know when we came down with Terry's mom. Since we had permanent residency, we hired a broker. It really was, we drove up, the immigration guy came out of the office to the car, took Terry's mom's fingerprints because she couldn't really get out of the car per se, and then everything was done that way. So who knows what process you'll have to go through.
One day it's something, yeah.
But there is a process.
Clear as mud.
Yeah.
And does it have to clear as mud? And do you have to have funds in a Mexican bank account or in a U.S.? Well, it could be anywhere.
Right.
It can be anywhere. Just they want to see your funds.
No, they just want to make sure you're not going to come in here and then want to be dependent on the government to
mooch off
and
off
take
the
about
government.
$200 a month that the government would give to you to live off of.
Right.
Okay. What would you say? Are there any cons of living in Mexico? In Cabo?
Shopping?
See,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like efficiency is not a thing here. Things run pretty smoothly in the U.S. just on a day-to-day shopping basis, getting a driver's license, things like that. And if you think it's not efficient in the U.S., then coming here is like, forget it. that it's the culture is perfectly fine standing in line to check out or at an ATM for an hour or whatever. Or if the bank runs out of money, it's like, okay, well, I'll come back tomorrow. So if you come from, like, if you're kind of a type A personality and you want like bam, 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 then that I think was the thing that drove me crazy for a long time. And it still does sometimes. Just the pace is so slow, and it's probably good to not be so like under pressure.
It's probably healthier.
Right. But if that's not how you're wired, I think that's probably, to me, what comes to mind is kind of the drawback. But
Yeah.
I'd have to get used to that.
I mean, going back to getting our driver's license, you start the process and there's lines that you get into, and they'll go through your paperwork and they'll say, oh, you're missing something. Then you have to go and get that something, and then you go back and they continue on, oh, you're missing something else. They can't.
Why didn't you tell me the first time?
Right. They stop immediately at the first missing thing and they don't look to see what else is missing. So we had to do 3 different things.
Run across the street to make copies of something and come back and then do that again and then do that again. But
it's annoying.
Right.
But then, so they have 4 lines or 4 people helping you with the driver's license and 4 people helping you with getting your tag. So there's 8 people helping people at one time.
And they weren't all busy at once either.
And then you have to go and stand in another line where there's 2 cashiers that will take your payment from those 8 people that have been working with these 8. So the payment line then becomes very large, and people, they just stand in line and they don't seem to care. It's like,
and then after 20 or 30 minutes in line, one of those cashiers closed because somebody had to count their cash, and so we're down to 1. It's like, are we ever going to get out of here? So that I think we spent 3 hours yesterday, 3.5 hours getting the driver's license, which we also had to walk probably a couple of miles because we had to go get our blood test, because you have to have a certificate with your blood type on it for the driver's license. So we went and did that.
But they didn't require you to take a driver's test.
Right. Because we had a U.S. driver's license, then that's all they needed. And we were actually able to get both a vehicle driver's license and a motorcycle driver's license, just in case we ever want to ride a motorcycle. We have it. So.
But they have the mañana mentality.
Exactly.
We'll do tomorrow.
Right.
Tomorrow's fine.
Right. And nobody gets mad in line. If that's what was going on back in the States, there'd be people.
Oh, forget it.
Hurry it up, open more line. What the?
Yeah.
You name it. It'd be a viral video. Like every minute. And here it's like.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the other con is driving. So there's no really rules of the road. A stop sign doesn't mean stop. A red light doesn't mean stop. Green doesn't mean go, but all intersections are 4-way stops no matter what. And every lane's a turn lane no matter which way you want to turn.
So,
really?
Yeah.
So the way I describe it is driving here is like driving in a video game, and living here is like living in a sitcom.
Yeah,
That pretty much sums it up.
that's a pretty good description.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, in wrapping up, what would you say to our audience if they're thinking about relocating to Cabo?
I'd say give it a try. I mean, we were in shock the first time we came down here, how quickly we fell in love with it. And if you're interested in wanting to see property, I can show you around. There's something for everyone within any budget that you're looking for.
Yeah, I'd say definitely take the time to visit here. There's plenty of properties to rent, Airbnb or what have you, but spend a little time here, especially if you're considering moving here. The resorts are wonderful, but it's like being in a cocoon, so you don't quite get the feel for being here, truly.
Right.
So kind of get a place and spend a little bit of time here, get the feel for what it's like to be a local, maybe rent a car and just kind of explore the town, get to know some people, and it's...
I was just going to say, you talk about resorts, and it's a good point to make that I'd stay at a resort, but I would not do the all-inclusive of a resort because you're going to miss out on so many good restaurants. I mean,
Yeah, you don't get out.
Most resort food probably isn't that good. I mean, maybe you think it is. I don't. But there are so many good restaurants to choose from, and it's safe to go to. So don't do the all-inclusive. Go and enjoy the restaurants.
Excellent. Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate it, and our listeners appreciate it. You're very informative, and thank you for all the information about Cabo. We'll certainly take a look at Cabo as well.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. You too,
Thanks.
Brian.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. See you guys soon.
All right.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and consider making a donation by clicking the coffee cup on any page at www.wheredogaysretire.com. Each cup of coffee that you buy costs $5 and goes towards helping us continue the podcast. Thank you for your continued support.